I appreciate you stopping by to check out yet another episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about something that really isn't vintage, but would be very useful for certain vintage audio aficionados. And that is the Neohipo ET30 Speaker Amplifier Switcher. And it allows you to switch between two different amplifiers and two different speakers. And so it would be very useful for someone who has, say, a tube amplifier and a solid state amplifier and maybe a bookshelf speaker and a regular full-size speaker that they want to switch between. Or possibly you just want to listen between two different speakers or maybe two different amplifiers, or you could do preamplifiers if you wanted as well. And so it's a very useful device. It's got the nice big VU meters. It's very solidly built. I want to give full disclosure in that I contacted Neohipo and asked them if I could get a sample. I told them I have a YouTube channel and gave them a link and let them watch what I do. And they sent me one, so I get to keep it. I guess that's my reward for reviewing it. And I don't have to give a favorable review. As you've seen from my videos, I basically call things as I see them. I don't have any agenda. I don't get paid by anybody, so I get to kind of do my own little thing. So what you're going to see is what I measured, what I thought of using it, and it's kind of what I do every now and then. Now, you do get a remote control. This little guy right here, it does all the functions on the front, and it does one more, which is the on-off, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then you have about a 3-meter USB. It's got USB-C and then the normal USB-A, I think it is, on one end, and that powers it. So it's kind of a neat little unit, and you'll see a little tour of the front and then of the back, and then I'll show you what it looks like inside. And then of course there will be data on it, and then I will tell you what I thought after listening to it. Here's a close-up view of the ET30, and you can see these large VU meters. This button right here is our amplifier selection button, and it will select between the A or B amplifiers, and an LED will light depending on which amplifier is selected. This button right here is for your microphone selection. If it's pressed and the LED's on for mic, it's using the microphone in the back to provide the signal for the VU meters. Otherwise, it uses the amplifier selection to drive the VU meters, which is the one that I would recommend using for most applications. This right here is our speaker 1 or 2 selector, and it will light up an LED depending on which speaker is selected. This guy right here, if you press it in, it will turn on the lights and change the brightness in some small steps. And if you turn it right or left, you can change the colors of the LEDs, and you'll see that in a video. This guy right here is called sensitivity, and this guy right here is called swing range. To me, this should be called sensitivity or gain, and then this should be the swing range. So I think they're really labeled kind of reverse, at least in the way I look at things. And I should note that all of the A and B and the microphone and the speaker selectors, as well as the color knob, are all adjustable from the remote control. This obviously is the rear. It's pretty straightforward. Your USB-C power comes right in here. And then you have your microphone here if you select that option. And then you have your 3-way binding post for your amplifier and speaker connections. Now, there's a lot of room between these. These are not kind of the standard spacing, which to me is a good thing because you can easily put a nice big spade lug on here, and they are easier to grip for somebody with big fingers like myself, as far as having room in here. So overall, they're gold plated, and they worked rather well for me. Here's an inside view once the top cover is removed, and you can see the relays that they're using here, as well as just kind of construction. Now, it does have resistors here, power resistors, for when you are switching amplifiers. It dumps the signal into one of these dummy loads just to prevent any damage. I have another box, switch box, that doesn't have these, and I've never had any damage. I'm It's supposedly a good thing to do, but sometimes I kind of wonder if it's really necessary. And this is kind of just a view of it. And here is another view looking the other direction. This obviously is the front where the meters are. And you can kind of just see the way things are connected. It's just kind of an overall view of how this guy is put together. Right now, I've got a 1 kilohertz signal going into the ET30, and it's from the QA403. And that 1 kilohertz signal is actually pulsed on and off. It's the way the analyzer works. And that's why you're seeing this thing swing. And I wanted to demonstrate what the controls do. Now, this sensitivity here, if I put that to minimum, the meters do not move as much. And if I move it to maximum, they're going to move more. It's kind of just showing the swing, I guess, is how I would call it. I would call that the swing sensitivity. More than what that control does, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in the middle. This other one is called the swing range, and I would call that the sensitivity. I'm going to go ahead and put it in CW mode. So right now I've got the signal at 1 kilohertz going in to the ET30. Well, actually it's going into the Bryston 2B LP, and then it's going into the ET30, and then it goes into the 8 ohm loads. And I've got it set to give about 26 watts into 8 ohm loads. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this control called the swing range. And that's kind of the calibration point. So I'm going to set that for 0, even though both channels are right at 26 watts. Right there, they're both at about 0 dB. So now I'm going to drop the power by 3 dB. So I'm at 26 watts. I'm going to go ahead and make that 13 watts. Right now I've cut the power in half. Instead of 26 watts, it's 13 watts, which would be 3 dB less. And it's pretty much right at 3 dB less for both channels, so that's pretty good. And this is at 1 kilohertz. So right now I've upped the power coming out of the Bryston 2P LP amplifier by 3 dB. I upped it from 26 watts into 8 ohms to about 52 watts into 8 ohms, and you can see that we're at about 2.5 dB best case. So even though we increased it by 3 dB, our ET30 display did not quite go all the way to 3 dB. So right now I've adjusted the frequency to 250 hertz, and I've got it set up for 52 watts into 8 ohm loads, and you can see we're at a 0 dB reference. I'm going to drop the power down to half that, which would be 26 watts or 3 dB, and we'll see if we show a 3 dB drop. I dropped the power by 3 dB, and you can see we're only down 2 dB. So it's not going to be very, very accurate as far as showing that you're precisely 3 dB down from a certain point. It's a little bit closer, I think, at 1 kilohertz than 250 hertz, but it's just kind of there for reference. But I thought I would show you how accurate it was or inaccurate it was. But it's just kind of a little guide, and they're fun to watch. The other neat thing is you can change the colors of the backlight, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust it. Kind of gets reddish, kind of that warm glow. It's kind of a neat red. And that's kind of the range of colors, and if you press it in, it will turn the lights off. Right now I'm showing the remote control. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And one function that the remote control does that you can't find anywhere else on the ET30 is the power on off. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And I do have a signal going into it. Now, if I go ahead and turn it off, it's still putting a signal through the ET30. You can't tell that because the meters aren't moving, but indeed the signal is going through, and it's allowing you to use the unit without it being on if for some reason you didn't want it on, as long as it is powered to the USB source. If I remove the USB power source, then no signal will transmit through the ET30. So if you didn't want the display on or the meters to move or any of that stuff, you could just turn it off and it would still function as a switch with whatever the positioning was that you left it at. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And the first thing I'm going to do is adjust the light color for you. So I'm going to just move around here and we'll see the different shades. I'm just changing it one click at a time. What's interesting is there is not a Macintosh blue, but there's kind of a little bit of a blue. There's definitely a green. So right now I've got the lighting set off. I can go up one on the brightness level, go up another level on the brightness, go up another level on the brightness, even one more level, and then it goes back to off. So you have those controls from the remote. If you wanted to use the microphone to drive the meters, you could do that. The microphone is in the back of the unit, which you saw earlier, but I can switch it on from here, and you can see that if I talk real loud, the meters move. So I'll go back to letting the actual amplifier drive the VU meter. So you do have that ability. You can also do quick changes in color. There is on the remote control, you can change like more of a color. There's a YE, so more of a yellow, and then I can go to the green, which is GN. So you can switch between those two pretty easily. That's kind of what's going on with the remote. Now, as far as these settings, when I unplug the USB power from the unit, and I'm going to do that right now, nothing's happening and there is no signal going to my analyzer right now. I'm going to go plug it back in. So I plugged it back in. It remembered that I was on amp A and speaker 2 and what color I had. So if this unit was hooked up to a little USB adapter, which was hooked up to a switched outlet on a integrated amp or receiver or preamp, this seems to remember the settings at least for 24 hours. That's about as long as I left it unplugged without any USB power plugged into it. You would have to try it and see if it remembered the settings for a longer period of being off, but right now for at least a day it seemed to remember where it was set at when the power was applied to it again. So that's kind of just an overview of how it functions. Here is our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz. Now the right channel is going to be the control channel, I guess you would call it. It is using the same connectors, but it is bypassing the ET30, and the left channel is going through the ET30, and the path that's selected is the B amplifier to the number 1 speaker, and this would just be the left in this case. So you can kind of see there really isn't a lot of difference between the two channels. I mean, the right channel, which is bypassing it but still using the same cables and interconnections, is maybe a dB.5 higher in SNR, but the THDs are pretty much the same, and there's really no loss going through this. So right now it's basically looking about the same, either going through the ET30 or not going through it, and I'm putting in 2 volts RMS at 1 kilohertz. Here is the ET30's frequency response from 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz. The input signal is 2 volts RMS, and I'm using the channel B amplifier going to the channel 1 speaker, and the right channel is, I'll call it the reference channel. That's the one in red, and that is bypassing the ET30. So it really doesn't affect the frequency response at all going through the ET30. We're down about, what, 0.04 dB, worst case maybe 0.03 dB right here at 20 kilohertz. So there's really no difference between going through the ET30 or not going through it. Although there's probably about 0.01 dB difference between the two going through it. So it's not really frequency dependent that much at all. This frequency response looks identical to the one right before it, and the difference with this one is that I selected the A amp input, and we are looking at the output of speaker number 1, so there really is no difference in the pass from A to B as far as frequency response. Once again, here's the frequency response from 10 Hertz to 40 kilohertz with a 2 volt RMS signal going into the A amplifier input, and we are looking at the speaker 2 output. The red channel, or the right channel, is bypassing the ET30 altogether. As before, there really is no difference in frequency response at all going through the unit, and the loss going through the unit is maybe 0.01 dB at worst case. Here is our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with a 2 volt RMS signal going into the A amplifier input, and the number 2 speaker output is what is being selected, and so that's the path we're going through. This basically is kind of the system limits of my device with the length of cables that I have hooked up to the inputs and outputs of the device. And right now the right channel is connected directly to the A amplifier input, so in effect it's bypassing the ET30. And so right now I'm going to connect directly to the B right channel output, and we'll see how much it changes, if at all. So the right channel gain didn't really change, SNR didn't really change, THD didn't really change, which just goes to show you that the ET30 really doesn't affect the signal at all. This plot shows the crosstalk, and in this case it is between the amp A to speaker 2 and then the amp A to speaker 1. This right here is the left to right crosstalk from A to 2. This is the right to left crosstalk from A to 2. This is the left to right crosstalk for speaker 1 to A, and then this guy right here is the right to left crosstalk from amplifier A to speaker 2, and this is all with a 2 volt RMS signal applied. The worst case crosstalk is pretty good at about 75 dB, and you can see that both of the crosstalks are pretty darn near the same. Now we're going to look at the input to input isolation. In this case I have selected amp A, and that's where the signal is going in. Amplifier B is terminated into 8 ohm loads, and we are looking at the output as measured at speaker number 1. And so what I'm going to do now is switch over to amplifier B. So now it's been switched over to amplifier B, and what we're looking at is the isolation. Now we started off at 0 dBV and we're down about, we'll say 94 dBV or so, worst case for the left channel. So that's the isolation here at 20 kilohertz, and then at 20 hertz we've got better than 110 dB of isolation, and pretty much it's better than 100 dB of isolation, except once we get to around 10 kilohertz, and then it goes down to about 94 dB or so. So it has quite a bit of isolation between the amplifier A input and the amplifier B input. Here is a plot showing the input to input isolation for the amplifier A being terminated and the signal going into amplifier B, and I'm still selecting speaker number 1, and you can see there's really no difference. So the ET30 has really good input to input isolation. Right now we're looking at the ET30's THD versus frequency for a couple different input signal levels. Now we're starting off at 6 dBV, which would be 2 volts RMS, and we're going down to minus 21 dBV. Now that's not typically anywhere near your power that's going to be going to your speaker, but it should be fairly linear with speakers. So the big takeaway is that we're not more than 0.01% THD from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. It really doesn't matter that much what level's going in to the ET30. It's not really going to distort very much. And the path that I've chosen for this is the amplifier B input to the speaker 1 output. Right now I'm going to show the setup to use the ET30 to compare two amplifiers. And we're only using one set of speakers for this case, but you could easily have another set of speakers hooked up. I'm using my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2s, which are out of the picture here. We are going to switch between the Carver M400A Cube right there, or the Ayama A08 Pro, which is actually an integrated amplifier, which is nice because it has a volume control. What I'm going to do is show you how the level is set to kind of match the amplifiers in case you don't have a multimeter that can measure AC frequency. You can use the VU meters in the ET30 rather nicely. And what I'm going to be doing is playing a 1 kilohertz tone, which will be muted while I set it up. Since the Carver does not have a gain control, I will set the preamp up till I'm at a comfortable level with the 1 kilohertz tone. I will set this guy for 0 dB, and then I will switch over to the Yamaha A08 Pro and adjust the volume until it is also at 0 dB. So at least at 1 kilohertz, the two amplifiers will be fairly matched in amplitude. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. And I kind of had adjusted the A08 Pro a little bit earlier, so it was matched. And now what I'm going to do is just switch between amplifiers and make sure that no amplifier dies during this testing. And I will have the results of that when I give you my summary here in just a moment. One other thing you can do, if you have pink or white noise, you could play that. And I'm going to play that and adjust the Yamaha a little bit more. I think it needs a little bit more gain to balance out with the Carver M400A. So hold on to your hat. We're going to listen to some white noise. That's the Carver. That's the Yamaha. Right now I'm switching, but you really can't hear a difference. No, I don't know how well you could hear me, but I was switching and couldn't really hear a difference with the white noise. So we are good to go for the listening test. And if there's any problems or anything weird going on, I'll tell you in just a little bit. I forgot to mention that the ET30 comes with this little user's manual, which covers a few of the specifications, which are really only the power, and it describes what the functions do fairly well and all that. So it's a nice little unit all in all. As you saw from the test data, basically this isn't going to affect your signal that's going into your amplifiers or coming out of them. It's pretty much invisible to them, which is what you want as far as the isolation, and it doesn't really add any distortion. It seems like a very solidly built unit, and compared to a couple of the other units out there, it's got the bigger VU meters, and I would vote for this guy over some of the other ones. Now, I do use a different tester for my A/B test. It tests very well, and the main advantage to that one is it has a big LED window that tells you that you're on A or B or C, so you can read it. The only bad thing I can say about this guy is that the little LEDs up front, unless you're 5-6 feet away, you're probably not going to see them. So it's not as easy to tell whether you're on amp A or B or speaker 1 or 2. That is the only disadvantage that I found to using this. But for most people, if you're going to do an A/B test, you can move this thing closer to where you can see them and know which amplifier or speaker you're on. So I don't think for a normal A/B test it would be that difficult, but for the things I do with my buddies where I do an A/B test, you really want to have a big LED displays so they know precisely that they're on the one. Where this one, you know, it's harder to see once you're, I don't know, probably more than 5 or 6 feet away. So that's the only negative that I found on this. It measures great. It's not going to affect your sound. You can set the meters to whatever color you want. I wish they had a Macintosh blue, but they don't. They have other colors. I think some of the reds are nice. And anyway, it does have a lot of versatility as far as the display. As I said earlier, the controls, I would call them different things. I think the swing control should be called something different, and the range control should be called something different. But once you know their functions, it's pretty easy to adjust them the way you want. So as far as using this, you saw in the videos, I used it to A/B between 2 amplifiers, and it worked great. As far as who I would give the better sound to, maybe slightly the Carver M400A, but there was very little difference. And I was more checking to make sure that I didn't destroy either amplifier when I was switching, and I probably got up to maybe 25 watts a channel, I'm guessing. So it wasn't a ton of power, but it was enough that if something didn't work right, you know, there had been feedback to one amp and maybe they would have blown, but everything worked fine. And you hear a little click maybe when the relay goes, depending on the particular kind of music. With my other A/B switcher, that happens too. At lower levels, you can kind of hear the little relay click, but it's very fast. Or maybe you hear a little nuance in the sound when it's clicking, but it still allows for a very quick comparison between the 2 sources, or 2 speakers. So it's a very useful device. Something like this will possibly save you a lot of money in comparing say different amplifiers or receivers or that kind of thing. And if you build yourself some adapters, you could use it for a preamplifier. And let me show one of those adapters. They're little adapters, and you can buy this little adapter here, and it just takes wire, and I think I have 16 gauge wire, and then it has an RCA input there, and then you can just buy your banana jacks and put them on here. And so you could use this to switch through other things, and that's kind of how I do my testing, is through these things, because I did lower level testing up to 2 volts RMS, and I use these, and it kind of just gives you an idea whether things distort. And then, as you saw, when I cranked it up to a bit over 200 watts into 4 ohms and switched and all that, it survived that test. So anyway, it did what it's supposed to. I would recommend this, not just because they gave it to me. I've seen a couple of these, and I've had, like I said earlier, the DUAC, similar kind of a unit, although it only switches between it's got either 1 output or 2 inputs, or it's not got 4 selections on the back, it's got 3, so you could use it between, say, 2 amplifiers and 1 speaker, or 1 speaker and 2 amplifiers. Where this, you can do a little bit more, but this is about the same price as that. It has a flat frequency response, and I just really liked it. I think it's kind of cool. So that's kind of my take on this guy. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so, as that helps a lot. And if you like the video, of course, the thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, whatever. And I love to hear your comments if you leave them. So until next time, I hope you all have a great day or night.